Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel and thank you for watching this video of mine. In this talk video, I know that title looked very cliche, nature or nurture, and I'm sure you've all heard a lot about it and probably thought a lot about it as well. But I just wanted to still talk some things about it, some things which I think or I hope will come across as a bit new, even a bit original, some things you might not have heard before. So yes, again, without further ado, I'm Hirsch Saha, as usual, reporting from Auckland, New Zealand. Today is, yes, Thursday, the 18th of June, 2026. Phew, almost, um, almost, halfway through the year. Where has the year gone, has it? But anyway, yes, we all hear about nurture, versus or nature versus nurture. The people who we turn out to be in life. Is it because of the genes we're born with, nature, or is it the way that we're raised, nurture? And I know you'll say, oh, Hirsch, the answer to that is obvious. It's both. It's a lot of both. But what I wanted to reference in this talk video is that documentary that was, I think it's still on Netflix, called Three Identical Strangers. Three Identical Strangers. It's a movie doco of about 1.5 hours long, which came out in 2018, so it's not too old. That's about, what is that, 8 years old. And I actually saw it twice for this talk video. It's an hour and a half long, and being a 90s kid, used to movies of being that length, and I think I actually prefer an hour and a half, to be honest, or personally, I prefer that length. But I saw it twice, and what it showed was it was actually not a government run program or experiment, but in the United States, I think going back to the 50s, what they did actually is that there was a private group this documentary talked about, and what they did is they had three triplets, three identical triplets, and they actually separated them at birth. And it was actually all part of an experiment. They played it off as just normal, them just being separated and given to different families for adoption. But actually, it was all intentional. It was all planned. It was all documented. It was even all assessed, even after the adoption took place. So you had a set of triplets, three boys, and what they did is they purposely placed one in a poorer family, a second in the middle class family, and the third, you guessed it, in a more upper class, well off, rich family. And what they wanted to do as part of their own research experiment back in the 50s is that they wanted to really, figure it out once and for all. The people we turn out being, is it nature, the genes we're born with, or is it nurture, how we're raised? And I know you'll say, oh, it's both. It's both. But no, we'll get into that. And it's really interesting. What actually happened is that the three identical strangers, I think when they were about 18, 19, and going off to university or college, is actually when they bumped into each other. First, one bumped into another one, and they're like, oh my God, we're twins. We're twins. Somehow separated at birth and, being sent to different families and adoption. And then it's like, and then they published it in the paper, and then they found out, no, it's not just twins. There was a third one. They were actually triplets. And so they all came together. And it was, it was televised. It was, it went into the media. They couldn't believe it that these three triplets, who didn't even know they had, they were triplets until well into their teens, being separated at birth, that they were separated at birth and they were all put in different families, although all in the United States. But remember, it actually came out that this was all part of a planned experiment. And of course, it's something that I admit that you could argue, but look, it's a way to find out a lot. It's a way to do a lot of research. It's a way to answer a lot of pressing questions that I think we all have. Sure, but to play with people like that, like I remember they were interviewing one of the men in the documentary, and they're asking, "How did you feel?" And he's like, "Oh, like a lab rat." And yes, I could definitely sympathize with that. I could, to actually do that with people, to experiment with people, to treat them as lab rats. Jesus Christ, I'm actually getting the shocking you know, I'm getting that, shocking vision. Oh, it almost reminds you of, like what they did in some of the concentration camps during the Holocaust, during World War II, when they were actually experimenting with the people imprisoned in those camps, they experimented on so many things. They were trying to, even experimenting if they could turn brown eyes into blue because blue eyes was seen as, superior, things like that. And it's just horrible to experiment with human beings. I mean, come on, come on it's like I said in that other video, you never hit a woman. I definitely agree with that. But no, I think we should go a bit further. You never hit anyone, regardless of who they are, male or female, rich or poor, white or black, good looking or not. you get the picture. And I really do think that that's how we should behave all human life, regardless of who it is, and where they come from and what they look like and who they are really. All human life should be treated as sacred. It really should. It really should. We should never put a price on humanity. Just like what has been happened then, or what was done with slavery, for example. That should never happen. All human beings are fundamentally the same, As they say, the difference in DNA between man and ape is less than 2%. From person to person, it is less than 0.2%. If you believe that or not, it is seriously less than 0.2%. But coming back to this documentary, Three Identical Strangers, what happened is that when the men grew up and became 18 and older, were adults, and they found each other and they came back together, they eventually figured out that this is all a planned experiment. Of course, they were angry, but still, it was protected by a particular, I think, a university. And the final results and the findings of the research can actually not be released, if I remember correctly, until 2066. They managed to protect it for like whatever 100 years from when the research or the assessment finished. And on that note, what they actually did, not only did they purposely separate them at birth and put them into poor, middle class, and rich families, they did continuous assessment after that, where they would have men going to the homes of the families who had adopted these children and just taking notes and observing. And the parents probably thought, oh, that's probably just part of the adoption process. They're just checking they were taking good care of the baby or the child that were adopted, right? Fair enough. And they're just keeping records to make sure that that baby, that child is healthy and performing well and all that. But really, it was all part of that experiment. They were trying to assess how these three identical triplets turned out and performed under the different parents or the different sets of parents, the poor, middle class, and richer families. And I do think it's horrible, and I do think that they treated them awfully, and that they owe them so much. But unfortunately, it did go through, and even the findings of all this research, like I said, cannot be released until, if I am correct, if memory serves me right, until 2066. Um, yeah, I'm not sure the people, these triplets won't even be alive by then, right? Probably not. But hopefully it will get released, and hopefully it will at least help them in some way. But I just hope that something can be paid back to them, if anything, some form of reparation, if anything. I'm not sure if it will, but I just hope that it can, because they deserve that at the very least, right? So they did that on purpose, and they were assessing these children as they grew up. And then when the three triplets found each other in adulthood, of course, as you can imagine, it was in the papers. It became a media storm. They appeared on talk shows and everything. And I think they started to live together. And it was amazing, even though they were three identical triplets, and they grew up in different families, rich, middle, and poor. It's still they had so many extreme similarities, like the way they sat, their posture, the woman they loved, the woman they went for. They tend to go for the same types of woman, or the same sort of woman in terms of how the way the woman looked. They all enjoyed the same brand of cigarettes. They had a lot of similarities, as you could imagine, as identical triplets, and that's the nature part of it, the genes you're born with. They had a lot of similarities, but at the same time, they also had a lot of differences. They also had a lot of differences. In fact, very unfortunately, out of the three triplets and into adulthood, one of the three triplets, sorry, I can't remember the names of them, but one of them actually committed suicide, very unfortunately, so sadly, and they believe it's because of how that triplet, that man, he was raised by his particular father, and his father being very harsh on him. And they believe that that contributed to him perhaps feeling depressed or unwanted or feeling ostracized or worth nothing, and it led him to commit suicide, whereas the other two did not. They prevailed, they continued. So unfortunately, one of the triplets are no longer with us. There's only two left. So really what they found is that, yes, nature played a very big part. The genes you have play a very big part in who you turn out to be or who you become. Things like habits and values and wants and interests, likes, things like that. But at the same time, it was not just nature, the genes. It was also nurture, the way they were brought up. That also had a huge impact on who they ended up being. Yes, they were three identical triplets. Yes, they had so many things in common, uncanny things in common. But they also had so many differences. I'm just reiterating that. And I know you're thinking, okay, well, we're back to the same conclusion, Hirsch. People always ask, is it nature or is it nurture? Is it the genes you're born with or is it the way you're raised? No, it's both. It's both. But people always want to see how much of it is both? Of course, it's both. Of course, it's a lot of both. But is it perhaps one more than the other? That's the burning question. I don't think they're absolutely equal, 50-50. Perhaps it is one more than the other. And again, we won't actually know, at least from this experiment, because that research won't be released for some time to come. What is it, 2066? What is that, 40 years or so away? But I saw this documentary twice, and from what I saw, and I really thought about it, and of course, this is my opinion, and you're entitled to your own opinion. Feel free to drop your opinion in the comments below, and especially if you've seen the documentary, feel free to drop your opinion from after seeing it, or you can go and see the documentary if it's still on Netflix, or you can look it up online if it's not, and you can give your opinion after watching it. Hopefully I haven't spoiled anything for you in that documentary. I don't think I have. I think there's still a lot there to see which I haven't covered, which I haven't spoken about, and hopefully, if anything, I've piqued your interest and sparked your interest and encouraged you to watch it. But when I really thought about it, when I thought about it for a long time, and when I really thought about it in depth, the conclusion I came to, and of course, feel free to disagree with it, but I would say it is nature and nurture. Nature, the genes you're born with, and nurture, the way you're raised. And unfortunately, either which you have any control of, right? But I would say from watching this documentary and really thinking about it myself, and also thinking about everything that I've come across and what I know, in my opinion, giving an educated guess, if you like, I would say it's basically 45% nature and 55% nurture. Really, that's what I would say. Again, feel free to disagree with it. But I would say that yes, nature definitely plays a part. The genes you're born with definitely do play a part. And some things you just can't change. Like they say, height, for example, is 100% inherited, or from genes. You cannot do a damn thing about it. And don't quote me on this. I've even heard that physical strength in men, that is mostly inherited. Don't quote me on that, but that's actually what I've heard. And probably a lot of things, especially physical, are quite inherited, and maybe even mental too. But really, from what I saw in this documentary and when I really thought about it for a long time, I would say it is nature 45% and nurture 55%. So nurture just a little bit more than nature. They're not quite 50-50. I would honestly say, and I really did think about it a lot, nature 45%, nurture 55%. So if that's anything to take away from this video, of course, nature you can't do a damn thing about, unfortunately, but nurture, especially if you are a parent, that is something you can do something about, upbringing. And of course, nature is just the genes you inherit when you're born, and you've got those genes and they're in you and they're there for life. But nurture is everything after that, from birth till the age of 18, and even after 18, when you become an adult and grow up. Don't forget that. And if anything, a message to take away from this is that upbringing is very, very, very important. How you treat your children, even after they grow up, and the relationships you have with them, even after they grow up and move out. It's very important. The people who surround you have a huge impact on you. They really do. Not just family, but not just parents, but other family, siblings, extended family, friends, co-workers, partners. They all have a huge effect on you. You might remember me saying before that I remember hearing somewhere that 80% of success is just avoiding negative people. I'm not sure if I would agree with that, like I said before, but maybe not quite 80% of success is just avoiding negative people, but probably a lot of it is avoiding negative people. So keep that in mind. So if you can take away anything from this, I mean, it's still a very interesting conclusion. It's an interesting video about an interesting documentary, and hopefully an interesting educated guess that I made as a conclusion, what I took from it, those two proportions I determined of nature and nurture. But if anything, especially if you are a parent, remember that, just how you take care of your kids all throughout from birth to 18 and afterwards is very important. In general, who you associate with and who you spend time with, who you talk to, and the effects they have on you, that is very important. If you are a child and being brought up by parents, perhaps it's something to keep in mind and maybe even talk to your own parents about, regardless of your age. Hey, it's never too late to change things, improve things, is it? Well, there you go. And once again, hopefully, I've, inspired you and helped you at least in some ways, at least got you thinking. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Feel free to like, subscribe to the channel, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you.